Joining us now to talk about the reform of voting laws in the state are Representative Eric Major. Representative Major is a member of the House Elections Committee, and former State Representative Bob McKee. Representative McKee formerly also served on the committee. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us tonight. There are some states in which there's an automatic recount when a race is very close, within a certain percentage. Has it ever been proposed in the legislature during your time, Representative McKee, and I'll keep calling you that out of habit.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. McKee, has it been, did it ever come up for a vote?
No, I don't believe that particular idea has. There's been talk about it with a package, but it never came to the committee that I can recall. Certainly not in my tenure, and it certainly didn't come to the floor of the House during my tenure in the legislature.
Never a hot issue until
No, I don't believe
year.
so, and I think that's to be expected. And I do believe that it ought to be one of many reforms that point was made, and which I agree with, that we must have some standardization first. There are many problems in recounting ballots. If we are sure that we can recount them right, then that's one thing. But right now, I don't know that I have confidence that we can, in fact, recount them correctly.
Representative Major?
I think there's nothing more important than the voters having confidence in it. When they go out and vote, that their vote is going to be counted. I'm going to be proposing in the upcoming session a bill that does exactly that, to create a trigger of 1/2 to make sure there's an automatic recount on any measure or during any election cycle. I think it's important that people have to have confidence in the system, in the sense that, democracy, if your vote doesn't count, then, what does it mean?
Now, Representative McKee points out, former Representative McKee, points out that there are some divergent ways of different kinds of machines and all that. This may be something that costs some money.
I'm in agreement, but I think in a democracy, making sure that the people's vote count is something that's worth spending the money to do. I think how we come up with revenue is certainly the state is facing a bunch of revenue issues, but I think that should be something that should be on the top of our pile of issues that we need to handle, election reform.
Does Alabama have good ballot security, Mr. McKay?
For the most part, I believe we have very good ballot security. There are 2 or 3 measures that I need to point out, in my opinion, ought to go with this. One is the voter ID bill. We ought to have a strong voter identification bill. Personally, I would prefer a photo ID, but I'm sure that's not going to pass the legislature. I say I'm sure, I suspect it won't. But it's a mystery to me why we can have people that go, for instance, and have food stamps, and they show a picture ID, a photo ID, and nobody minds that. So that's where, whatever it is, we should start there with a good, strong bill. Then we ought to have bipartisan poll watchers. That is, we ought to have members of both parties at all of the precincts, and that's another safeguard. Then we should have standardization, and I agree if it costs some money, then we need to look and see what we can do. Once we have the standardization and we can actually believe the recount, I mean, if we can't believe the first count now, who knows if we can believe the recount? So I think it poses some real problems, and all of them sort of work together. And I don't think isolating one of these issues is going to accomplish very much.
Representative, if you can hold that thought for just a moment. Back to our conversation about election laws in Alabama and the need for some reforms, kind of a disjointed conversation. But to recap briefly, Mr. McKee was suggesting that we need a voter ID bill with photos included in Alabama. Mr. Major, Representative Major.
The thing I do agree with Mr. McKee on is the standardization of how we vote, the voting method. That is an area that we do agree, but I don't know, especially when you look at the rate that people, that voters are turning out to figure out another way of harassing them when they do come to the polling places. I don't know if that's the answer to voting reform. I think that people have to feel free and open to go and participate in the election cycle. They don't have to feel, especially with the history this state has when it comes to citizens going to vote. I don't know if we want to walk back in that direction again. I think the thing that the proper thing for us to do is to make sure it's that we have a standard method of voting for everyone, and also make sure that if for some reason there's any question, like in this past case and what happened in the presidential election, quite frankly, that people can feel assured that their vote was counted. If it takes recounting them, I think that's it, and making sure that we have a method set up that people can feel confident in the system that they go to vote.
Yeah, Mr. McKee, doesn't Alabama's unique history when it comes to voting and blocking African American citizens especially from voting, doesn't that come into play here?
Not in my opinion it doesn't, because if you look at some of the areas in the state, especially I remember the election of 1980, some of the counties in this state had more registered voters, people on a voting list, than actually adult people living in those counties. Now, so where do we start here? Do we start with a recount, or do we start with clean elections? Now, we've made some progress in that regard. So what's wrong with having a voter ID? I mean, it's not a chilling effect to the person that goes to the grocery store to get their groceries. Nobody thinks that it is. It's not intimidating. They just do. So I don't see it as being a matter of intimidating anybody. If you're going to have honest elections, then why not know that the person voting is in fact the person it claims to be? I mean, that's where you start. Then you do the other things as well. I don't have a problem with a recount under certain circumstances, but I think there's a lot that needs to be done before that is triggered.
Representative?
I mean, I would be in agreement with him that we need to find methods of making sure that there's no voter fraud taking place during the election cycle. But I don't know if the answer is beginning, especially with the unique history this state has, in treating some citizens when they went out to vote were not afforded that opportunity or were punished because they went out and tried to participate in the system. I don't know if we want to take any measures that would take any steps back. We need to be looking forward and see how we can encourage more people to participate in the system, make the system open so that we can detect voter fraud. There are ways we can do that. I think that if there have been times where voter fraud has been proven. If in those cases, we need to make sure we punish people that abuse the system.
On the other hand, though, if you go out to rent a movie at movie gallery or something, they're going to ask for an ID, and that's only, I mean, the worst that can happen is a $75, $80 movie is gone.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, and that is a concern of mine, but at the same time, when you go to rent out a movie, you don't have the fear that because you rented that movie, somebody's going to show up at your house that night. I think that's the difference, and I wouldn't feel comfortable, especially with the unique history in this state of how we've treated our voters. Again, we want to make sure people feel free and to participate in the system. I think that's something Mr. McKee and all of us want to take place.
Last word on that?
Well, the unique history of this state also includes a lot of voter fraud in certain counties of the state. And heretofore, I did certainly not trust the results in many of those counties because of the machinations that were used. So to say that unique history, it works both ways. And I think we had no reports, to my knowledge, of any of the abuses that he's alluded to here, and I don't think we're going to see that. I think a lot of that's been taken care of, and so we should start with a strong voter ID bill, standardization in the process, and then a recount triggered by a certain amount of vote differential.
Yeah, you suggested poll watchers. I thought that both parties already had representatives.
They
at the
have
polls.
poll watchers for the individual, but poll workers, those who are hired and paid for, there are many counties, for instance, where a Republican is not present at the precinct. And he should be. A Republican should be, and a Democrat should be present at Republican strongholds.
Libertarians as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I guess that begs the question of where do you end and how many people can the state afford to have at the polling place as election officials. As you pointed out earlier, each party already has an opportunity to send watchers there to make sure that if there's any irregularities, there's somebody there to watch that, and that's something that I'm in agreement with. But the officials that he's referring to are people that are paid for by the state to make sure where we're going to end, what party is allotted somebody for the state to hire to be in the polling place. I don't know that we need to do that. And again, with the voter ID thing, today we're going to ask, let me see your ID. Tomorrow is how many licks in a lollipop. I think that when we begin to start questioning people when they come to the voting poll, it has the potential to get out of hand. And it has been out of hand before in this state.
All right, I know there has been a concession. I know that we have an inauguration coming up, but do you believe, Representative Major, that the election was won fairly and squarely by Republican Bob Riley?
I do believe it, and I think the governor has accepted that, and we're going to look. But I think the message is sent by the people of Alabama is that I think they want to see fair and openness, and they want to see participation from both sides. And to the governor-elect's credit, to this point, he has shown a willingness to be open and work with people from every end. So I just look forward to trying to work and move the state forward.
Okay, Mr. McKee, I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did Mr. Riley win fair and square?
Yes, I think so, and I think it's unfortunate the mistake in reporting occurred in Baldwin County, because otherwise Congressman Riley would have been ahead the whole night instead of the reverse. But just go back again and say to my good friend Eric, whom I respect so much and glad he's back, that start with a voter identification, a strong measure, standardization, then a recount if you need a recount.
Is the election committee in the House, is it made up of, is it a bipartisan committee, evenly divided, or how?
Well,
in the past?
It can't be evenly divided because of the fact you have such a minority of Republicans. So you will have about 9 or 10 Democrats at least, and then not more than 6 Republicans on the committee.
Do you think that will have an impact on what kind of
Well,
legislation passes?
It might, but and my reason for saying that both major parties should be represented at each precinct, if a lot of cases there is no Republican in a precinct, then whoever's paid, a Republican could come in from any place in the state and be paid the same amount as any other worker. So the money is no problem. And it ought to be done, just a check and balance. Nobody's going to do wrong, but hey, just in case.
When you say there are no Republicans, you mean a district that is predominantly Democratic?
Absolutely.
And there are no Republicans within
That's right.
20 miles or something?
That's right.
Bring one in from another county?
That's correct. Why not?
Do you object to that?
Well, I think, again, each candidate that's running has an opportunity to send a watcher in to make sure that the official is doing his job. As we look at many problems in finances this state already has, I don't know if we need to be wasting money by importing people into counties to officiate election cycles. I think the money would probably be better spent on textbooks and teacher, making sure we have adequate teachers in our schools.
Representative, thank you for being with us. I know you have an organizing session coming up in January and then a full session in March.
Yep.
We'll be watching for your comments.
Thank you.
Mr. McKee, we're going to miss your Sign and Die song at the end of that session in
I'll have to
2003.
come back and do that for you.
Maybe we can get you to do that. Thank you both very much for your
Thank you.
time.